Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at the easiest DPS classes to play in Legion. I've done a very similar video about healers if you want to check that out, but today we'll be looking at the DPS. So when I was actually comprising this list, I was looking at multiple different parameters, because if you're a new player or an existing player in World of Warcraft, you'll be looking at least at some of the points that I'll be making here. So for new players, they'll be looking at how easy is the rotation. That's the priority. How easy is the rotation? Because if a certain class has an easy rotation, I can focus on the boss mechanics. I won't die from the boss mechanics as much because I know the rotation is quite easy. My muscle memory after a couple of weeks of playing this class, like I won't even have to think about it. And I'll be focusing on boss mechanics. Really important for new players and existing players when choosing an easy DPS class. Now you have to look at things like, does movement impact my DPS? So in this video I'll be looking at melee and range DPS. And the biggest problem with range DPS or new players that start playing a range DPS is that they do not anticipate movement in a fight. Let's say a boss is about to do a knockback. You're doing a 2-second cast of something, whatever, and the boss is about to do a knockback and your cast is interrupted. You lost a lot of DPS. If you know that if you're not sure if there's going to be like fire placed around you in the next couple of seconds, and you're about to do like popping your cooldowns and things like that, and you have to make sure to be stationary, and all of a sudden you have to move, your DPS is going to be terrible, especially if you don't optimize your cooldown. So, do these classes suffer from movement? Very important when considering ranged DPS. Probably one of the most important things when I really think about it, especially for new players. You also can have a look at things like how good is the class's soloing content, doing quests, doing things like that, farming. You also have to look, I decided to have a look at legendary dependence. If you boosted a new class and you're liking the new class and all of a sudden you got the worst legendary, and there is a perceived the best legendary for that certain class. Like there's a lot of classes like fire mages, rogues who have like, you know, the bracers for fire mages or the shoulders for the rogues, who are like, you kind of have to have this legendary to do really good DPS. If you boosted a class and all of a sudden you're not getting those legendaries, you can feel really down about the whole class. You might not even want to play them. So that's also a consideration. So when I look at all of this, there is one class that kind of comes ahead out of is ahead of everyone else by a little bit. Every other class after that is kind of relatively similar. And you have to keep in mind when I say a difficult spec and things like that, there really isn't that many difficult specs in World of Warcraft, especially after all the spell pruning that's been happening. A good example of this is in Battle for Azeroth. Resto Druids getting their artifact, Essence of Ganir, merged into their Flourish ability, so now 2 abilities become 1. This has been happening for a really long time in World of Warcraft. And a lot of the classes are really not that hard to play. There really isn't a class that's like, oh my god, you need to be super skillful to play this. There really isn't that many classes like that. So when I say easy class, a lot of the other classes might be, not that far behind in terms of how easy they are. So you have to keep that in mind. For me, one of the best beginner specs is the Beast Mastery Hunter. And you probably heard this in a lot of the different forums and things like that. Beast Mastery Hunters have been referred to as one of the best beginner classes probably throughout the whole Legion, and there are multiple reasons why. First of all, Beast Mastery Hunter rotation is basically 3 or 4 buttons on top of some longer cooldowns that you don't have to worry about for a minute or 2 or whatever. So the rotation by itself is relatively simple. It's not that hard. The tiers don't really make it that much harder. So for a lot of the other classes that I'll be mentioning, tiers do tend to make the rotation a bit harder, so you have to consider that as well, depending on which tier 20, tier 21 you're using. So, rotation is not hard, 3 or 4 buttons on top of cooldowns. One of the biggest things that makes Beastmaster Hunters quite a good beginner spec is the movement. You can do amazing DPS on the move. You do not have to worry about making sure you place yourself in that area of the room, because I know this area is going to be covered in fire in the next 2 seconds. You don't have to worry about that. You can just move and do your DPS on the go. That is a big plus to any ranged class out there, to be able to do your top DPS on the move. And Beastmaster Hunters are great in doing that. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I actually included them in the list. on top of the easy rotation. You also have to consider that Beast Mastery Hunters are one of the least legendary dependent classes in the game. They really don't have the, the one legendary that you need to get, the one legendary that's going to bring you 20% DPS increase. They don't. A lot of the legendaries are actually quite decent. There are, of course, combination of legendaries that are strong for certain situations, for AoE, for single target, but they're not that crazy ahead of your bottom legendary. So as a new player, if you boost a Beast Mastery Hunter, you don't really have to be so sad about getting any of the legendaries. You'll be quite happy. So that's a big point. On top of that, you have a pet that is just can be considered a tank in solo situations. You can solo anything. You can do the harder quests. You don't need any help. You're covered in the solo situations. And in terms of raid viability, Beast Mastery Hunters are pretty low. One of the lowest DPS in on Taurus. And a lot of people will say that it's because the rotation and you can do damage on the move. Because of that, your DPS is not that great. You're one of the lowest DPS in raid scenarios. A lot of people will consider Marksmanship or Survival Hunter. Survival Hunters are climbing to be the raid spec. In 5-mans, Beast Mastery Hunters are pretty good. Their utility is quite amazing. They're the only class that can actually provide Bloodlust, Heroism, and Battle Res. Keep in mind that Battle Res has been heavily nerfed in 5-mans, and it no longer, if you bring 5 Battle Res classes, you won't get 5 Battle Reses. It comes down in time increments, so you have to keep that in mind. And on top of that, the probably negative effect about it is that Beast Mastery Hunters, their tier sets like tier 20, tier 19, and tier 21, the combinations between them, there's actually so many combinations. Tier 20 is quite good, tier 19 is quite good, tier 21, 2-set, 4-set can be good. So you have to sim yourself for all of these tier sets kind of deal. And there are certain tier sets that are better in 5-mans and in raids. So if you really, after you've been playing your Beast Mastery for quite a while, you want to optimize your DPS, you might have to go start farming Tomb of Sargeras or maybe even Nighthold, if you really want to get some of that topped up DPS. But that's down the line. So that is Beast Mastery Hunter. So now let's look. We looked at the range DPS. Let's look at the melee class. Let's look at one melee DPS class. So there's quite a few options here. I don't feel that these classes are as easy as a Beast Mastery or as least dependent on legendaries as Beast Mastery Hunters. I could have included things like the warrior specs. Fury and arms can be regarded as quite relatively easy and things like that, Frosty Ks maybe, but I decided to include Havoc Demon Hunters. So Havoc Demon Hunters have been kind of up and down the whole of Legion. At the start of Legion, they were very strong melee class in 5-mans, in raids, arguably had the most broken burst in the game, where you could see your Havoc Demon Hunter will be twice the damage in the first 30 seconds because their cooldowns were so strong. They were really strong. But over the time, on Taurus, they're kind of fallen down. They're kind of mid of the table in terms of raids and even 5-mans. So if you want to look at the raid viability, they're not as OP as they used to be. But if you look at the rotation, you see the list of rotation here, you have to keep in mind that the talent choices are heavily impact the difficulty of Havoc Demon Hunter rotation. So a lot of the times, the rotation is not going to be that hard, depending on the talents that you choose. And you don't have to be oh my god, the list has so many buttons and so many things. It's really not that hard to actually play a Havoc Demon Hunter. And on top of that, you kind of have to enjoy a spammy playstyle. Because if you look at the APM, or actions per minute in terms of classes, you'll see that Havoc Demon Hunters have the highest action per minute, which means that you'll be spamming your abilities quite a lot. You'll be pressing a lot, you'll be pressing buttons a lot, but there's not that many buttons to press. But you have to keep that in mind. If you do not like this hectic kind of game style where you'll be always doing something, you might not consider Havoc Demon Hunters to be your DPS or melee DPS of choice based on the spammy rotation. Quite a few people like that, especially people who choose to play melee, because if they choose to play melee, they want to go into the action. They want to feel like they're part of the action, and pressing buttons a lot of times is kind of brings that kind of environment to them. In terms of legendaries, yeah, legendary choices are not that great for Havoc Demon Hunters. They do have a biz. They have quite a few biz legendaries. In terms of legendary that you really want to get, the Anger Ring is considered to be quite strong in nearly every situation. So it's never good for a class to have a biz legendary, because if you roll this class and you don't get this legendary, you will feel very down about the whole situation and you might not even play the class. So I don't like the legendary dependence for Havoc Demon Hunters. Like, on top of that, they also have the legendary head, Radons, they also have Zephyrs for like cleave if you can proc it and things like that. So they have a list of legendaries that you really want to get in order to optimize your DPS. But like I said, if you like the spammy game style, Havoc Demon Hunters can be really fun to play as well. Really fun to play in raids and 5-man situations. So now let's look at the secondary or second range class that I decided to include in this video. I was kind of deciding, I had a hard time to decide between an Affliction Warlock, which can be viewed as a relatively simple DPS class who's very strong right now, one of the strongest DPS classes in the game. A lot of times when I mention it and I say simple DPS class, you have to keep in mind it might be a simple to start off, but all of these classes will require good class knowledge and good game knowledge in order to master them in every single situation, like AoE, single target, cleave situations. You will need time to master them, but to start them off, it might not be that hard. I was thinking between Affliction Warlock, but I decided to go with the Balanced Druid after I saw the new DAD build that's been introduced in the Balanced Druid community. So the DAD build is purely a build aimed at people who cannot optimize their movement, who do not want to focus on the rotation as much, who want to have more time at, looking at the boss abilities, avoiding boss abilities, because the whole purpose of that build, which was mainly born in the 5-man situations, and a lot of people will tell you that that build is probably geared towards the 5-man, but it can be used in raids. But that build basically means you will be using Starfall all the time, with Stellar Drift, which allows you to cast while moving in Starfall, means that you do not have to worry about movement. You will have Starfall up at all times, due to the talents that you use, due to the legends that you use. You will have Starfall up at all times, and you'll be able to do your rotation and not worry about losing DPS due to fire spawning or a knockback or whatever, if you play it correctly. So it almost becomes that build, Balanced Druid, becomes like a Beast Mastery Hunter. Does not worry about movement at all. In order to do this, you have to actually... Balanced Druids have a lot of legendaries. For the DAD build, you'll have things like Radiant Moonlight, Honest Intuition, Zephyrus, Lady in the Child. So you'll have different legendary builds for single target and AoE. If you do not want to go with the DAD build and you want to play the Balanced Druid normally without spamming Starfall, even in non-single target situations, or even in single target situations, the normal rotation for Balanced Druid is really not that hard. Keep the dots up, use the artifact ability Moons, use Star Soldiers or Starfalls depending if there is AoE situation or single target, spend your powered Lunar Strikes or Solar Rats, and then you use a filler. It really is very simple, even without the DAD build. It's very simple. Now, like I mentioned, legendaries. There are so many legendaries. When I talk about a class having a legendary combo for single target and a legendary combo for AoE, when I talk about Balanced Druids, you have a legendary combo for single target which is quite static. You have the Honest Intuition and you have the cooldown ring. In terms of AoE, you have quite few legendary combos for different AoE situations, which can be optimal for 5+ targets, for 3+ targets, for short bursts and things like that. So if you really want to optimize it, you have to have quite a few legendaries for Balanced Druid. In terms of survivability and things like that, Balanced Druids are very solid for 5-mans and raids. Bear form is just unbelievable. Bear form is one of the strongest cooldowns in the game right now. Every Druid who plays, any Druid that plays the game right now knows the bear form is quite overpowered as a personal cooldown. In terms of raid viability, Boomkins are extremely strong for spread AoE. The tier 21 has increased their dot potential, but Balanced Druid single target is one of the lowest in the game right now. So if you want to do really strong single target DPS, and if you want to do a lot of single target content, or if you enjoy single target content, you will have to know that balanced druids are quite poor at single target, and they're one of the bottom tier single target classes in the game. In terms of AoE, they're one of the best ones. So you have to compromise, can't have the best of both worlds. So let's look at our second melee DPS class. So there were quite a few options again. So when I mentioned we were talking about Demon Hunters, I could have included Warriors here. I could have maybe included Frosty Case to some extent. There could have been more classes included here, but I decided to go with Retribution Paladins. And Retribution Paladins for a long time in Legion have been regarded as one of the simpler DPS classes. If you look at the rotation, you'll notice that there really isn't that much stuff to look after. It's one of those rotations where it'll take you a couple of days, couple of weeks or whatever to really kind of master it. Now, for a lot of these rotations, tier 21, tier 20 or whatever will make it more difficult to play, or you'll be like, okay, I'm so used to playing this rotation, but now once I got tier 21 or tier 20, I kind of have to relearn it again. That's going to happen. You have to keep that in mind. Tiers will change your game style, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Most of the time for the better. So you have to keep that in mind. But it's mainly a 3 or 4 button rotation. It really isn't that hard to get used to it. Retribution Paladins in terms of viability, again, have always been around mid-tier in raids and 5-mans, depending on which levels you're doing. In terms of legendaries, class ring, belt, cloak, all considered to be quite strong. The class ring itself can, like, if you're playing a Holy Paladin, there's a high chance that you might have gotten the class ring already, and you might have the biz legendaries for Retribution. Like the belt and ring are considered to be very strong combo as well. So even as a Holy Paladin, you might even have the best legendaries for Retribution already, so you could try it out. You could try it out for a bit. The downside or the upside, I don't know how you want to consider this, the whole game style of Retribution Paladins, they are quite reliant on avenging wrath, so their main cooldown. They're quite reliant on that cooldown. You could see this because if you look at the relics that extend the duration of your wings, or your avenging wrath, their value used to be so big, because you want to extend the duration of a cooldown for as long as possible, because majority or a lot of your damage will be coming during your wings uptime. So the problem here is that if you're a new player, you're not sure when to use your cooldowns. You're not sure when the boss like takes in extra additional damage. There are quite a few mythic plus bosses that will take, like, you know, for the next 20 seconds they're taking extra 200% damage, and you want to use your cooldowns. If you're not aware of those mechanics, if you're not aware of how to optimize your cooldown usage, you will suffer by playing a Retribution Paladin, because a lot of your damage will be coming from the wings duration. But if once you master it, once you know exactly when to use it, you will notice your damage jump like crazy, because they're very cooldown dependent. But you also can have a look at the now I actually quite like this talent, Divine Intervention. So bubble, if you play a Holy Paladin or whatever, you'll notice that, you know, you have a bubble that if you're about to die, you have to activate it. If you want to soak an ability, you have to activate it. Now, Retribution Paladins have an ability to spec into Divine Intervention talent, which means that if you died, or if your health dropped really low, it'll auto-proc. The bubble will auto-proc. So if you're unaware of the fact that the boss is targeting you, and you're about to get smashed in the face and die, you don't have to worry, because you'll get a second chance. Because Divine Intervention, with Divine Intervention, a bubble will proc and you'll survive. Now, a lot of people use this talent, some people don't. I consider this to be a very beginner-friendly talent. I think it's really cool, because if you might not be aware of the fact, you might not be aware of the boss abilities, you might not be aware of what to avoid. So this will save your life at least a couple of times. I think this talent itself is a very good example of a talent that really helps out beginner players. Really helps out. So this has been my list of the classes that I consider to be quite easy to play. I mentioned this at the start. These classes might be easy to start with, but to master a class takes quite some time, and that is actually true for every single class that I mentioned, every single class in Legion. In order to become really good at your class, for every different situation that's available there, AoE, single target, whatever, you will need to put your time into that class. You will need to look at different resources, different guides, different videos, whatever. But if you want to start off one of these classes, these are very good starter beginner classes, and over time you can start to master them. So hopefully, actually, let me know what you think I missed out on. Let me know what class you think I should have included. Thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you in my next video.